Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Four Pillar Podcast. We stand for faith, family, fitness, and finance. To do all four of those in your life, I think creates the fifth thing, and that is fulfillment. If you keep all those things in alignment. So today we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to break this down in a couple part series, and today we're focusing on leadership in the workplace. And we may get into a couple different topics with that because we do have Rolo Sanchez here. He was an Apache pilot.
Yeah,
did I say it correctly? Yeah.
Yeah, I got 3,300 hours in the AH-64 Delta Echo. I also flew A models in the AH-64 Apache. So,
and how long were you in the military for total?
So I joined the Army in 1997, and I got a total of 26 years. Come 1 September 2023 of this year, I'll be officially retired.
Awesome. So, and I mean, obviously, our military, I think, has a lot of good leadership, especially when you're in the field that long. So, really excited to learn from him today and see what he thinks about leadership and how the Army and how he's used leadership in his life and how we can apply it to everyday life in our workplace or your business or whatever you do for work. So, Rolo, so what does leadership mean for you?
So what leadership means for me is influencing and motivating people for a common goal and purpose. And bottom line for me, just be a good human being. That's kind of what it does. I'll tell you what the Army definition is. In accordance with the Army definition, ADP 6-22 is a manual. So obviously in the Army, we use manuals for everything.
Yeah.
I haven't looked in a while, so I looked it up last night for this. And it was leadership is the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, motivation to accomplish a mission, and improve the organization. I think that kind of comes where the civilian sector comes in, improving the organization. Obviously, in the our military side, it's accomplishing the mission at the end. But in the end, leadership is finding that drive and motivating people to get to that end state, that mission, whatever it is. If it's take the hill or if it's complete the services on a bunch of trucks, right? It's just influencing and motivating people.
What's the number one way you think that you can engage leadership as far as I think action speaks louder than words a lot of the time. Would you agree with that, or what's the
100%? And we could break it down even further. Again, I'll just kind of reference myself with all the stuff that taught me throughout the years and through leaders and mentors. And you're right, it's just action. So mentorship is number one. If you're a subordinate and you want to be like that person who's leading, right? So, or you don't want to be like that person. So it's a be, a know, and a do. And I think the presence and characters right there is that be. You want to be that leader that has a presence and it has a good moral character. So that's kind of where you want to go and how to be the good leader for that. And like you said, the presence is kind of the biggest deal. If you just show up on the hangar floor or just show up in the warehouse, bark a bunch of orders, and then leave, kind of presence is that showing? What kind of character or moral with that? So
yeah, I mean that's creating. That's really putting you into a boss position, or not. I'm trying to think of a word for it, but I don't think that's really a leader a lot of the times. I mean, it's necessary, obviously, that I think tell people, like, obviously, if you have a game plan for a business, or I'm assuming for you guys, like, obviously, you have to go over a plan and tell people what they need to do. But I think there's a huge difference when you start talking about leadership versus being a boss, which isn't always respected as much.
It is, and I think that presence is when you coming in is asking how somebody's doing today. Just that simple question will show that that person cares with that. So just asking to be in that presence. Hey, how you doing today? And they can give you a response. I'm doing good. I'm doing bad. Or I have this. And sometimes you can get some information that's underlying that you'd be like, oh, well, that's why he was slow yesterday on his quota, or that's why he was a rude dude. There's just always some understanding, and then maybe you can help them out. But being that presence is always good. And I learned that from one of my old battalion commanders, Colonel Gilbertson. He was always one to ask and know the why, and it was always good for that presence, to give that drive and that influence to lead people.
Well, it's probably even more than, do you feel like you had to get to know these people? I mean, it's one thing to ask how people are doing, but to take the time to know about their wife, their kids, their family, ask, hey, how's, Johnny doing with that, whatever he was going through, that probably helps as well, right?
It does, 110%. And that's kind of goes back, and that'll kind of go into building a team, right? So when you're onboarding somebody or building that team and just knowing showing that presence and asking those simple questions. I think today's generation, we kind of got away from that through text messages. Because I remember back in 1999, I would get a phone call about a formation change or something different.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get that phone call, my leader would ask me some questions. I'm like, hey, hope I didn't bother you. Like, oh, no, I was just changing the oil in my truck. And then before you know it, we're talking about 1955 trucks, whatever it is. But today is just, I'm going to send you a text message. Formation change tomorrow from 0630 to 07. Show up with a 50-pound rucksack. Mm-hmm. Acknowledge.
Yeah. So I think obviously advancing technology is very good. When we talk about human interaction, though, you're saying with communication, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge thing about calling people, even like for the gym. I'm sure all the trainers stuff hate me because I'm like, you need to call this person, because I understand texting is convenient, but there's so much more personality and stuff that you learn about the client, and you can share about your personal experience of your life with this person. It really helps you connect with the person. And I think what you're saying too is like within leadership as well. It allows you to, be a person and like you're saying.
Show that you care.
Show that you care. Besides just like, hey, you need to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, and it can go. And you could take that even further when it comes into that team building. Once you become that leader, or and whether it's you're a commander of a company of 120 infantry soldiers, or if you're commander of an aviation company which is only 30 shoulders, it's going to be trusting the leaders and the subordinate leaders to do that job, because you're only one person, right? So depending on how big your organization is, and trusting that person that they're going to kind of take your vision and leadership to the next level.
So I wanted to ask you, can you share, obviously, whatever story you think is appropriate, but share a story that you use leadership in, and for example, however you want to take the angle on that, but just an example you think that like you can share, like, hey, like this is how my action stood out. So or even something you've seen from one of your higher ups or a fellow soldier or something that you share, just a story that shows example of what leadership should be.
I think for me, throughout my career, I've always watched others, and like I kind of alluded at the beginning, is watch the mentors that you want to be like, or the leaders you want to be like, and then watch the ones you don't want to be like, and take the notes from both.
Right.
I had a really good mentor, Chief Warrant Officer for Bob Fullerton. He's an awesome guy. Kind of started off, I was a junior W2, he took me under his wing, and I kind of watched and learned from him of how to be a good leader. And one of the things I did pull from him was being the presence and always assisting and helping. So for me, throughout my career, and it was funny, I guess there's one story. We were at the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California. I was a Chief Warrant Officer for aviation maintenance officer for the whole squadron, kind of one of the executive chiefs, I guess you can put in the civilian world. And we had a broken helicopter. And during this National Training Center, you jump into what we call the box, which is the actual training area. So you have a staging area, and then once we're ready to kick off the training, then you jump into the field, or the box is what we call it.
Right.
Well, we had a broken helicopter, right? So we were short maintenance test pilots. So I came back. It was me and 3 crew chiefs. Our crew chiefs are the ones that maintain the helicopters. And we were working the main rotor blade. And I could have done the easy thing, got my rental car and just went back to the hotel and kind of hung out all day, right?
Right, it's not technically your job, right?
Not technically my job. My job is to do the test pilot, but I'm also a manager and I'm also a leader.
Right.
And I always love being in the present and working with the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
So there I am. It's 120 degrees. I'm on top of the main rotor blade, right next to it on the stand, applying some wedges, what we call for aerodynamics. And our 06, which is our brigade commander, so the chief executive, she came in and she looked up and she's like, Rolo, what are you doing up there? And I looked up and I'm like, I'm training these guys. And then she looked at me, she kind of shook my head, but she also knew that me being present and training and showing and leading from the front is more of the story, is leading from the front. And I was there training and showing these soldiers. And she looked at me, she was surprised, because that's her technique. She also likes to lead from the front,
right?
Try to be in the present. Even at the chief executive level, she was out there just walking around. She couldn't go in there and turn wrenches with me, obviously.
Right.
But her being present and showing and caring was that. So that's kind of one stories that always resonate in my mind, was just being there. It's like, I'm doing the right thing. I learned from the right mentors. She's a brigadier general now, and she's going to make her to go above and beyond. But with that, being in that presence. And there's a multitude of other stories I could talk about with that, with leadership. The one thing I want to, as far as my career is concerned, was I was always grateful that my leaders trusted me. So that's another aspect of leadership that we can look at, is trusting. Um, so way back when technology we have today with our text messages and satellite tracking, it was, here's your mission, go forth and do great things. You're the leader.
Right.
And at the time I was a junior soldier, or junior officer in the front seat of the Apache, just learning my craft. And we would go, as soon as we got outside of the communication of our main headquarters, which is about 30 miles, we were on our own, alone and unafraid. And it was either a captain, a 26-year-old kid that was in charge of our formation, right? Of course, we had some senior leaders, some warrant officers who were in their 30s and 40s and with experience. But that captain said, hey, we're going to go this way. We're going this way. Or, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. It was that trust that we had in them. But we also had the informal leaders, which is me, the warrant officers, giving them that guidance and experience to help make the right decision. So it was a big trust with that. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool.
You're probably going to trust someone more who, like you said about fixing the helicopter. I mean, you could have said, hey, get this fixed. And like you said, gone out with the rest of your day, or stay with them and do it with them.
Yep.
Right. I think there's a huge difference between saying, go and do this versus we're going to do this.
Yes.
Right. And being a part of it.
It's about building that team with that. And that's with being that good leader. And that aspect, I was that informal leader with that. I just kind of took that charge and was being there.
Why don't you define what you mean by informal leader?
So, and it's good that you brought that up, because I will give you the Army's official definition, but informal leader is somebody who is with a lot of experience, if that makes any sense. And then wherever there are leadership gaps, you go in and you step and take that charge, right? So being an informal leader, informal leadership, I'll give you the Army definition. Informal leadership exists throughout the organization and plays an important role in mission accomplishment. Informal leadership is not exercised based on rank or position in the organization. It stems from personnel initiative, which we just talked about a second ago, special knowledge and unique experiences, or technical expertise specific to an individual or team. So in my world, as a warrant officer, I'm a technical and tactical expert in my craft, flying the Apache. I can further go into that. I'm a maintenance test pilot, so I'm going more in the maintenance role. So I do it all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an air mission commander, I'm a pilot in command, maintenance test pilot, and a maintenance examiner. But all within that, in this one example, being an informal leader means I'm covering that leadership gap. So there might not be a non-commissioned officer there, and there might not be a commissioned officer. So they need some leadership, or they have a question. So now I'm that technical expert to kind of not only give them the technical expert, like red wire, blue wire, but do the red wire, do the blue wire. And if that doesn't work, then let's go ahead and disconnect red wire and blue wire and try the green wire, and then look for something else and then continue on. So I'm giving them that guidance and that leadership to go on and accomplish that within that organizational role, if that makes any sense. So I wanted to kind of correlate into a formal, here's what our definition is, but then give you an example of that. You need to hear in the gym, if somebody's not present, but action needs to be taken, one of your staff members can step up and take that. That's that informal leadership.
So they don't have any kind of leadership title, but they step up on their own, and
and it's kind of and it's usually kind of world in the technical and tactical in the Army, technical and technical world is where it is. You could almost equate it to a manager. A manager is the leader of processes, and will step up if needed for the leadership role, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was actually about to bring up or ask you. So, how do you think you can lead if you're not a boss, if you're not a manager, a boss, or whatever? You're just basically like a grunt, a grunt worker or whatever, like a lower rank, right? Mm-hmm. And same thing. I think I hear this a lot, or just hear people talk about. There's people that work in factories, or they have their jobs, or whatever. Obviously, they're like kind of like that middle level or lower level. And like, how does someone step? I think everybody can be a leader, right? To some extent, I think everybody should try to be, or want to be, or can lead people. So it can better your life or someone's life, or whatever, or the project. So how do how do you lead from the bottom, I guess is a good way to put it. And I think part of it is informal like you said, the informal leadership is what we're talking about. I think correlates with that, but especially with the army having a lot of ranking and stuff like that. So how do you lead from the bottom?
So, and I think that's a good question, and I will refrain that with one word of mentorship. So if you have a good leader at the top, the people on the bottom, at least in the army, I'm always looking for my replacement. So I always want to mentor somebody. I'm getting ready to retire, right? So I found a bunch of replacements for me. So the presence is kind of the first thing I'll say. So if you're like, what we do is a warrant officer one, I'll tell you that a warrant officer one will show up to the unit, and he will not fly for the first 2-3 months just because of, we got to get him into the pipeline. We got to do a bunch of ground classes, but his first job is to fill the fridge. That is his first job. So he's a snack guy, right? But we will gauge a lot of that, of how well he does the snack, right? So, and that's where you can, like you said, you asked, like, how do I do or step up or want to be a leadership? When you get that project, and that's when you start asking questions or making recommendations, and then setting the right example, right? Or what right looks like, what just right, always coming in on time. Well, back in my day with shiny boots, pressed uniform, haircut. So if you're just that worker that's coming in every day, well, it's always performing to that top level, right? You'll be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody's going to come in and bring in and mentor you. And then being able to speak with a problem and a solution. I think that's how you become that informal leader. I always told my subordinates or anybody, even when I was a company commander, if you guys got issues, I have zero issues hearing them, but please come to me with solutions, because I can't solve everybody's problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a solution within your own environment, please let it to me, and then I'll be the decision maker. So there's a difference there. Mm-hmm. So if you're down at the lower level and you're kind of seeing some problems, or you want to step it up to make something more efficient, if you have a good leader, they'll bring you in and they kind of mentor you, onboard you. You can then go rise the ranks, right? Going to go up. And do that. So I think in the end, mentorship, and going back to that W1, that's how we'll gauge. Because if he's moaning and groaning and fridge is never full or this, that, and the other, we can kind of gauge what his character is and how well he's going to do and go beyond. But if you go in there and there's like monsters and protein shakes and, all kinds of great snacks, healthy snacks and unhealthy snacks, and it's the best fridge ever, mm-hmm. then you just became a known person. Right. And then you also brought in some recommendations, and just kind of go from there. So I think somebody who's like like you said, just putting bumpers on every day and wants to kind of grow up and wants to bring the recommendations. If you have a problem, you bring a solution, find a mentor, and just kind of go up from there. And be in the right presence, the right place, right time, in a professional manner.
Yeah, I heard the kind of like a motto or something like that. The way you do one thing, or the way you do anything, is how you do everything. Mm-hmm. And that could be, like you're saying, stocking the fridge. So if you do a bad job stocking the fridge, I mean, obviously that, to a lot of people, or probably in the military, that seems to be like a really simple and basic task, right? And there's nothing complex about it, but how you do it, if you do it well, as in keeping healthy stuff in there, keeping it stocked well, probably even keeping it clean, mm-hmm. all that stuff. How you do that, if you do that well, you're probably good. You'll be able to fly a helicopter well. It's kind of like, well, I mean, right. There's a big gap in between.
We could trust you. And it goes back.
But you'll go into it with the same attitude and work ethic.
Yep.
Right.
And that's what it boils down to. We're trying to find your character. What is your character with that? And which builds into a lot of the trust and being there, the be no do. So,
well, I think in the workplace, there's a lot of people who stick to, you were talking about middle level or lower level, like, they just stick to job description. And if something comes up, they'll say, I don't get paid to do that. Mm-hmm. But some people have it in them, whether it's because they want to advance in their career, or like you said, because they have good moral character, they'll always do what's right, including leading when something needs to be led.
Exactly. Right. And I think as I transition out, I've been going to, the Army does a really great job. I know sometimes it gets a bad rap, but we do a really great job, or the Army does, on transitioning soldier members. For example, I'm here with this program right now to kind of ease in, and I'm learning so much about myself, how to interact with civilians and to go there. But one thing in the class, so the civilians come in from Fortune 500 companies, and they kind of teach us and mentors in classes. And they spoke exactly what you talked about, was the job description, and then a civilian world versus what my job description is I'm a salary 24/7, and I do anything from mop the floor to fly helicopters, right?
Right.
So, and I'll do everything in between. Doesn't matter. I get paid the same, but it goes back to my character, the team members. If I'm going to go mop the floors of my soldiers, because if I can help them to get out of work earlier, I'm going to do it, right? Even though it's not in my job description, I'm an A64 test pilot. So I'm going to think I'm going to have a little bit of a harder transition in there. But in the end, it goes back to but that's not who I am. That's not like, that's what I'm made of. So I'll go in there and do that. But I have heard that is a thing in the civilian world, the job description. So I'll have to find within that.
Oh, and you'll hear it all the time, especially the I don't get paid to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those people will never advance up, right? They'll complain that they never got a promotion or whatever, but I imagine bosses are looking for people who are willing to go beyond that. Just their current job description.
Or even they'll be asked, well, why did I get fired when I have to do layoffs or whatever? And as well, it's because,
if you had to pick between 10 people at the same level, and 5 of them were willing to do the extra work or lead, and the other 5 just stuck to the job description, well, then who are you going to get rid of?
Right.
Right. Makes it pretty easy.
That's what I've heard. So it kind of just finding that balance for me. And the one thing on leadership too, which we go back into leading and influencing people. And I think one thing we've gotten away from a little bit in the military for a multitude of reasons is being honest with somebody. People are afraid to be honest with them and give them the honest truth. So it's kind of like you said right now, well, it's not in my job description, or it's not this, or giving that honest feedback would be like, hey man, we're going to fire you today. Well, why? Well, remember yesterday we had a conversation about you not showing up on time and A, B, C, and D. Well, yeah, well, that's why I'm firing you, right? But you probably could have prevented that or influenced that person, because a lot of people are looking for that motivation, right? What is leadership? It's motivating and influencing people. So if you have a 5-minute conversation and just being honest with them, like, hey, have you looked in the mirror lately? You're not showing up on time. In the military, you're not getting your hair cut. Your uniform's always raggedy, A, B, C, and D. And they're like, no, I've never really noticed that, right? So hey, let's correct this right now. And then before you know it, that guy's going to go off to become an officer one day in the United States Army or be a sergeant major, right? It was just that one conversation that sometimes we don't have. And I don't think we have enough of those conversations of setting them, here's a problem, I got you some solutions. If you don't do those solutions and you continue to be a problem, well, I'm going to let you off, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I think it's just some people are, like you said, are surprised. And one's like, well, did we have a conversation, at least in the Army, do we have a conversation before? Do we put it on paper? We call it counseling statements. There's good counselings and bad counseling. We're supposed to do it every quarter. I think we kind of gotten away from that a little bit. Again, some of it was due to technology and text messages, but just being honest to people.
I think, I think in the civilian life, as far as like with businesses and stuff like that, and I think that's one thing, a big thing that I think businesses or people struggle with too, just being honest. And I think the other thing too that people struggle with is, trying to, if you're giving somebody feedback, trying to not get obviously if someone tells you something, you're not doing something right, like you're obviously not gonna be happy about it is the thing. But I think trying to find that balance between being honest with somebody and everything. So I think even for me owning a business this long, that's something I've struggled with too, even as being a leader, is like, okay, at what point do I be a little more brutally honest with somebody, or try to like tell them something in a nice way or something like that to get maybe I want this done this way or something, or the business needs to do this this way, and you're like, where do you be like, like what you're saying, being brutally honest with somebody, or just trying to nicely come across and I guess I don't know where I'm going with this, but
I think exactly where you're going is just being honest with them.
Yeah.
But then leading them and influence them to what you want.
Right.
Within that same conversation. So in the Army, we have like counseling statements like, hey, here's your infractions. Here's your retraining, for whatever it is. We're going to have you read the blue book for uniform standards within a 10th Mountain Division. And then here's what I'm going to do for you, and this is what we expect a month from now. And then holding that person accountable. So a month later and the guy's still the same, or soldier's still the same, or gal, hey, guess what? You're fired. And I think in the civilian world, I don't know how it equates, but in the Army, I know we've kind of lacked a little bit from that, and we're trying to go back into that. As a matter of fact, our new slogan is "Be all you can be." So back when I joined the Army slogan was "Be all you can be," an all volunteer force Army. And then we went into the global war on terrorism, and we became Army Strong and more team building. But now we're going back into I guess you could say, our generation, and we're all about the same age here, of be all you can be. So I kind of going back into some of the stuff that we used to do. You know?
Really quick, how old do you think Matt is?
Matt? I don't know. I'd have to guess somewhere around on me. So I'm going to go with the 42 to 45 range.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. How old do you think I am?
I'll go with about a 39 plus or minus a year.
He just graduated high school last year.
What's that?
He just graduated
high school last year.
I just turned 28.
28. Wow. So I had to do my math. Wasn't on looks. My math was on this awesome business you have. So, I'm just kind of assuming, going through the year and how long it would take, so I didn't do it off of looks. You do look younger. Okay. I just assumed, and I did the math with the business and how established it is. I mean, you guys just got an awesome award this year. So,
yeah. Well, no, I'm glad you didn't
So when
go
you
off
said
looks,
our generation, you were just talking about you and me. I remember Be All You Can Be. I don't know if he remembers that.
I was ready to say, I'm sorry, Rolo. I just remember Army Strong.
Army Strong. Exactly.
I'm glad it wasn't off looks. I about went through another midlife crisis right there.
No, I based it purely off the business and how established it is.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's actually a really big compliment. I thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's awesome what you have going on here and for the community. So it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think in the end, the leadership piece, like I said, being honest is one of the things that we in the Army are trying to get back to. Counseling and teaching more. Back in the day, we used to call it oak tree counseling. Just to go stand under a tree and just talk, have a conversation, and it goes back and then you go put it on paper of what it is. Shade tree counseling was another way of doing that. So it's been really good. The Army has taught me a lot, and I think leaders aren't born; they're trained. I mean, obviously, there's some stuff that you're born with, some attributes. Type A personality, type B personality, that type of deal. There's some psychology to it, but in the end, a leader is made, through good mentors. And I have been extremely fortunate that I just had good mentors along the way. I've also been fortunate, and I'm glad I didn't have too many, but I've had a couple of leaders that I didn't want to be like. So they gave me that both examples, right? Luckily, I would say about 85% of my leaders were all in the good category, but I did have a taste of that 15% of, okay, I don't want to be like that guy. Don't do what he did. That's not a good attribute. And that's what taught me.
Do you want to talk about what kind of attributes the good leaders had and the bad leaders had?
Yeah, I was ready to say, obviously you don't have to share names on this, but what's like, what are those, what bad things did you learn from like bad attributes that you saw in somebody as a leader?
I think one of it was presence and mistrust. Those were the two, the leaders who were never present, but always barked of why everything was wrong, because we were always waiting for that leader. He would say, we want to execute X. We're like, okay, cool. So we'll come back to him. And then we just couldn't find him. Right. Or he would show up, but he wasn't present and giving guidance. He was afraid to make decisions because in the end, that's what you're getting paid for. You're that decision maker. So you can't always be afraid not to make the decision. You just have to go with the decision and stick with it and go through with it. So as the subordinates and the informal leaders, and the experts, we would propose a plan or do this, and then that leader just never being present to make the decision or execute it, or we would make the decision ourselves and just say, hey, this is what we're going to go with, and need to come back and be like, well, that's not what I wanted. And we're like, we should have been here 2 days ago, or we asked you, here's some email traffic or whatever, text messages. So that was kind of the one that always stuck out to me, was not being in the present, and then not also taking in his expert's advice, thinking he knew everything, which is fine. That's cool. I mean, if you want to do that, but in the end, your end state's not going to get where you want. Don't be mad. I told you this is what's going to happen. Kind of, in that under your voice, be like, I told you that was going to happen.
Right.
With that. So that's kind of one of the biggest ones. And then the trust, being able to like go to a leader and the leader said, hey, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. It's awesome. Come back 2 days later and it wasn't executed.
Are you talking about you guys not trusting him or him not trusting you guys?
I would say subordinates not trusting the leader, because you're asking me about attributes that I don't want to have in a leader, or what I learned not to
Right.
do. So if
Right.
I always said I'm going to do something, you know, based off of that experience I had with that leader, you know, I always said, okay, I'm not going to do that. If I'm not going to make a promise that I can't keep,
Right.
you know. So to my subordinates, I would always say like, hey, yeah, sure, I think we can make that happen. Give me a day or two, but let's go with the best case scenario and let's go with worst case scenario. So that way they know what the best and worst is. But if it's something that I can execute tomorrow, like kid wants a letter of recommendation to be a warrant officer, sure, I could do that tomorrow. You know, I give them that expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, and those are just a very simple. I can go into more complex, but the trust. If you don't trust your leader, you know, how are you going to be able to be influenced by him? You know, when he says go charge the hill, how are you going to be able to want to stand behind him or her?
Right.
You know, today's well, him or her, within that. So I think those are the two things: being in the present and then trust. You can have both of those, being present and being able to trust that leader. I think those are the kind of my opinion is some of the best attributes you could have.
Well, if you got two guys and you're talking about someone who gives orders and then disappears, or somebody who's, you know, mopping floors, like you said, who are you going to trust? Who do you want to go to war with? Whose back do you want to have?
Yeah,
The guy who's present, doing the mopping the floors and doing, you know, like you said earlier, the grunt work, right?
Yeah, doing that work, not afraid to get his hands dirty.
Right.
And that's what it boils down to.
In that case, you're kind of working below your job description.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Not above it, but that's proving to your guys that you're one of them too. You know?
Not afraid to get dirty. I'm not afraid to get down with you.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. Matt, I need you to start stocking the fridge.
Okay. With all your favorite snacks.
Yeah, with all my favorite snacks.
Bunch of Twinkies and ho-hos, right?
Cow testicles too.
Yeah, definitely. Protein, right? Extra protein.
Have you ever had one before? I know we're getting off topic really quick. Have you ever had one?
Rocky Mountain oysters. Yes, growing up. So I grew up in Texas. So I joined the Army in 1997 in Benavides, Texas, down South Texas. And I worked with my uncle on the ranches and the farms. And what we did was every spring we'd get the calves and we had to make the steers, you know, this, that, and the other. So long story short, again, not to get off topic with the story, but when we were little, we'd have this coffee can. And so my uncles and everybody, you know, the older cousins would be knocking them down and we'd be cutting them. And that evening, that coffee can would just go in the back of the truck and we'd be done and be kind of like Yellowstone, you know, the rodeo, the calf, you know, the calving is done and we'd barbecue and those would go right on the fresh, about as fresh as you can do. So we go down to the water trough, the same water the cows drink, wash them all off, throw them on the grill. There you go. I personally did not like them or attribute them to, but so that's why I got an iron gut, you know, because he was like literally in a rusty coffee can right into the water trough with the cows drink off straight onto the rusty grill, right? So, but yes, I have had that. It's a delicacy.
It's an acquired taste.
Yeah, acquired taste.
A little chewy. My favorite, though, again, not to get off topic too much, would be cow intestines. Now we used to eat. Oh man, I can eat those all day long. Twice on Sundays, man.
I haven't had those before.
Oh yeah, you make them nice and crunchy. One of these days, if my wife ever lets me go buy some, I'll cook some for you.
I'd love to try them. Yeah.
With that, there was something I did want to talk. You're talking about that, about leadership. Oh, and here's one. So here's an example, about motivation, right? And we talked about being in that present, being that no, and kind of leading from the front. So this will take about a minute, and I'll read this. So Colonel Robert B. Knapp. So this is near Cagayan, Leyte, Philippines. So Battle of Leyte Gulf, with that December 14, 1944. Then Lieutenant Nett commanded Company E, 305th Infantry during an attack against a reinforced enemy battalion, which had held up the American advance for 2 days from entrenched positions. With another infantry company and armored vehicles, Company E advanced against heavy machine gun and small arms fire, with Lieutenant Nett spearheading the assault. During fierce hand-to-hand encounters, he killed 7 Japanese, and although seriously wounded, led his men forward, refusing to relinquish command. Again, being in the present and kind of continue to push forward. He was severely wounded again, but unwilling to retire, pressed ahead with his troops to assure capture of the objective. Wounded again in the final assault, he arranged the resumption of the advance before turning over his command. then walked unaided to the rear for medical treatment. Lieutenant Slet's remarkable courage and continuing to lead through sheer determination despite successive wounds. Lieutenant Net provided an inspiring example of his company and was instrumental in the capture of a vital strong point. For his actions, he received the Medal of Honor. So I think kind of what we just talked about, being in the present, motivating his soldiers, pushing forward. This lieutenant met all of those things. So when his subordinates were watching their leader, wounded, pushing forward and continuing on, and not wanting to stop, influenced and motivated his subordinates to continue to go through. So I think that kind of summarizes what we had talked about when being in the present, being able to trust. I trust that person. He's making the right decision because he's right next to me, versus he could have been, a 1,000 meters back making, I don't know,
Right.
So it's kind of in there. So I did want to share that with you. And then, so that goes to World War II. And there's one other one I wanted to share with you. Be real quick. Kind of the same example. This was in the Iraq War in 2003, which 20 years ago, I was there. So I LD'd line of departure, March 2023 or 2003. I was a young CW2 in a front seat of an A model Apache with 8 Hellfires, 38 rockets, 90 rounds, 30mm, and about 4 hours of gas, right? Alone and unafraid, right? So we pushed forward with Alpha Troop, with our squadron at 26 Cav. But this story is a little bit different. It talks a little bit about how to lead by example, I guess, and not get mad and be very, present and calm, So this is the reluctant machine gunner. In Iraq, 2003, the first combat experience for many, because it was the last war for us was the Gulf War, and even then that was a 72-hour ground war. Prior to that was, a couple little incursions here and there, Haiti, Panama, but the real big one was Vietnam right before that. So all volunteer army, going into combat for the first time in Iraq, 2003, or prior to that would have been Afghanistan. In Iraq, 2003, the first combat experience for many. Staff Sergeant Jones was new to combat, as were all members of his squad. They had not seen any action until they arrived in Ramadi. While clearing the section of buildings, they came under fire. Staff Sergeant Jones directed his M249 machine gunner to suppress an enemy position in an adjacent building. One gunner did not engage. Staff Sergeant Jones then directed his machine gunner to engage. He did not. Staff Sergeant Jones calmly moved to the gunner's position, took the machine gun, and fired a burst. Staff Sergeant Jones handed the weapon over to the machine gunner and said, "Suppress that position." The gunner did and did not hesitate again. Here, the squad leader instinctively knew that it would take what it would take to get a subordinate to act, because the squad leader understood that the squad leader did not have to threaten, belittle, or remove him from combat. The squad leader just had to show him what needed to be done and what could be done. So it goes back into that good leader, unproductive leader versus what he did. Hey, I just got to show you once. And then after that, what right looks like. He could have gone the opposite way, and he could have threatened him. He could have belittled him. He could have removed him. Couldn't threaten Uniform Corps Administrator just actions. But no, he said, hey, this is what you have to do in a very calm, lead from the front, be present, be active, know his people. Showed him once, boom. And after that, that squad gunner was ready to go. So it goes back into what I was talking about, at least for me and what I like to see, or what I try to present, is that being the presence and then that trust. Lead from the front, like mopping the floor versus not my job description, So that's kind of one of those stories that just kind of wanted to share with you. Again, this is all in our ADP 6.22, so that we follow. And again, it's been revised, and I haven't looked at this thing in years with that. But I really haven't had to go back always to the book because I've always had good leaders.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So just it's always kind of how do you formalize that, right? So, and sometimes it's good to formalize, and sometimes it's good to informalize your training and how you want to do it.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time today, so thank you, Rolo, for
Sorry
coming.
about
No,
that.
that was good. Those are two really good stories to end on. I think really good examples of what you were saying as far as being present and doing showing people being present and helping be a good leader. So yeah, thank you for coming in to talk. Talk again. And I think we're going to break this down like a 2-part series that we want to do as far as, like we said, leadership in the workplace, but then also like leadership in a family. or in your personal life as far as that goes. I think it's a little bit different. You could get, kind of in depth with those, especially obviously from being part of the military and having to travel a lot and dealing with family and all that stuff. So I think that'd be really good to hear about. So probably come back in again at some point and talk about that.
That'd be great.
But thank you guys for listening. Give us a subscribe or follow if you're listening on a podcast platform. If you're listening to on YouTube, give us a follow and subscribe as well. And remember, if you believe it, you can achieve it. We hope to see you in the gym soon. Thanks for listening.